Hello, everybody. Welcome to lesson 7. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, in fact. You did a lot of work. Congratulations. So, we have come up with evidence in our T-chart. We have figured out what the main claim is in the podcast and whether we think that it is persuasive or not individually, obviously not as a group. So now what are we going to do with all this information? We are going to start outlining an argumentative essay. So you're going to take your stance on whether it was persuasive or not and start developing that into a full-blown argument. So this might be a bit of a refresher for some of you, but we're going to go over the elements of an argumentative essay. If this is something you know very well, feel free to skip ahead. If there are portions of it that maybe you're not as strong in, say you're great at thesis statements, but you're not great at finding evidence, then go through the evidence section and see if there's some parts there that help you gather your evidence and put it in more seamlessly. So the elements of an argumentative essay are thesis statement, supporting claims, evidence, reasoning, or link from evidence to claim. So you're going to give your reasoning why this evidence is important to your claim. Counter argument, which we are going to get into later, but just wanted to put it in there. That will be part of your final essay. And conclusion. So, thesis statement. This is something I know everybody talks about in school all the time. I don't think I actually was very good at writing thesis statements until well into college. So I know that when I was in college, I needed a refresher on it. So that's what we're going to do. A thesis statement. What is it? What is it not? A thesis statement is not a title. A thesis statement is not an announcement of the subject. A thesis statement is not well, that's weird because it's in the name. It's not a statement or absolute fact. What is a thesis? It is your opinion stated as a fact. And as you can see down there, in the MLA handbook, and this is my attempt at ethos, quoting credible sources, defines a thesis statement as a single sentence that formulates both your topic and your point of view. So it is not a fact, but you are going to state it as a fact. Confidence. Thesis statements and arguments are all about confidence. Unity. So writing a thesis statement. A good thesis statement is unified. What does that mean, right? So unified means that it has a very singular focus and it doesn't contain any facts that don't relate to that focus. So if you say the food in the cafeteria is not nutritionally valuable and it doesn't taste good, and then you go on to say, and also I don't like carrots. Like the carrot part, your personal opinion doesn't really focus on what you're saying about it, right? So I have a couple of examples here. A disjointed statement, one that is not unified. Detective stories are not a high form of literature, but people have always been fascinated by them, and many fine writers have experimented with them. So the main crux there is detective stories are not a high form of literature. So that part about people having been fascinated by them doesn't really say much about it not being a form of high literature. A more concise one is detective stories appeal to the basic human desire for thrills. Very short, says everything it needs to, has its claim, and then you can move on. Here are my own examples of vague statements and then better and best. The vague statement is the food served in the cafeteria is bad. Super vague. I don't think you're going to get anyone to really have a huge argument there. It's not going to promote too much discussion. The better one is say cafeteria food is highly processed and lacks nutritional value. Better, right? It's a little more specific, takes a stance. The best one is the cafeteria food is highly processed, lacks nutritional value, and needs to serve more whole grains, fresh vegetables, and nutritionally dense meals. And for bonus points, if you can tell me what kind of claim I used there, it's kind of in there, but I'm giving a solution to a problem. And it's very specific, and it kind of gives a roadmap to what I'm going to be talking about, right? So this is going to kind of go hand in hand with what we learned about claims. How do I know if my thesis is strong? It's going to share a lot in common with just what is a strong claim. Have I taken a position that others might challenge or oppose? That's ultimately, like, it has to do that. If no one's going to oppose your opinion, it's not a good thesis. Is my thesis statement specific enough? And I know I've been harping on this a lot. I constantly ask you to be more specific. It's really important. That's why. How do I know? Well, here's a couple other, these are tests you can use to see if your thesis is strong. Does my thesis pass the so what test? So if you can share your thesis with peers or others, and then after they read it, if the reader's response says, so what? You probably need to go back and clarify and maybe get more specific, because if they don't care about it, they're not going to argue them. Another test, does my thesis pass the how and why test? If a reader's first response is how or why, your thesis may be too open-ended. So that's another indicator. You might want to go back and whittle it down and make it more concise, more specific. Now we're going to go into some evidence. Where do I find evidence? There's a lot of places. The most obvious place for this is going to be your 3 Mile podcast, but I do encourage you to look for some other sources that support your thesis, which you can find in print, electronic sources, interviews if you're super brave, surveys, personal experience. So print and electronic sources, books, journals, websites, newspapers, magazines, all this stuff that really, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I don't really think you're probably going to look at physical books, journals, and newspapers, but it's all online. So much information. So it's probably more electronic sources. Interviews. Interviews are a fantastic way to collect information, and it's a good way to get a primary source of information. In this particular subject that we're looking at, an example of doing an interview that would help you gather evidence is if you know someone who is a first-generation college graduate, or maybe they're just starting college. And you can interview them and see if their experiences match Jonathan, Raquel's, and Melanie's, and see how it relates to their experience. Surveys. Surveys are a fantastic way to get information. You don't have to create your own survey. There's plenty of survey information online. But it gives you an idea of what larger groups are thinking about a topic. So with this topic, you might look online to see if there's surveys on college admissions or how many college graduates by race or socioeconomic standing. Like, do wealthy students from a wealthy background, are they accepted to colleges at a higher rate than people from a lower, maybe near the poverty line? And what are their graduate rates like? And then how does that relate to the story that we've been listening to? Personal experience. Using your own experiences can be a very powerful way to appeal. Obviously, this is going to go to pathos. Personal experiences are pathos bread and butter. It's hard not to relate. You should, however, use it only when it's appropriate, and also do not use it as your only evidence. And then you have evidence from the actual podcast. Pull direct quotes, summarize information. Also, ask yourself, was the use of rhetorical appeals effective in persuading you or not? If the answer to this question aligns with your opinion that you used on the T-chart, then you're probably going to want to address it as one of your claims. That, you can either say they didn't use, the appeal of pathos very well, and then explain why. Or you thought that the appeal of logos was used incredibly well. It was the most persuasive thing about it. And then explain why from that point of view. And then the conclusion, the end of it. The aim is to convince the reader that your essay has covered all the important arguments about the issue and that your main point is the best position that anyone could possibly take. They're going to read it, and then they're going to think, how could I have ever thought differently on this topic? This brilliant person just changed my life. So, to do that, it offers a solution, especially if you're making a claim of policy. It clearly connects the introduction and the body of the paper. It gives a sense of completion. You don't want to read the conclusion and say, what else? It should wrap it all up, and you shouldn't have any more questions about it. And it does more than just restate your argument. It gives the readers something to think about, right? But you don't want them thinking like, I don't understand your point. You just want them to go, wow, they made an excellent argument, and I kind of want to know more about it maybe, because I agree with them. And that is what we'll be practicing in this lesson. We're going to outline our essay. So you've already done a lot of that work. You've already looked for evidence. You have taken a position on whether it was persuasive or not based on the evidence that you found that backs it up. And you know what position they took in the podcast to say whether they were persuasive or not in convincing you of that. And now we're going to start outlining it, so eventually you have your own argument. And I can't wait to read them. So, in your assignments page, we have an outline template. It'll guide you through it. One part you want to ignore right now is the counter argument. We are not going to focus on that at this time, but we will be circling back around to it. All right? Get to work.